microphones to men on the secretary, was pointed out before. Barry's actually at the moment out the back being photographed by the press, so I've got to stand in for a second. The next speaker in this section is James Gerrand, who is an aviation consultant from Melbourne who arrived here by bus. Probably makes him an arch skeptic. But he is from the Melbourne Committee of the Australian Skeptics, and some time ago the Melbourne Committee was the National Committee of the Australian Skeptics, and therefore was involved in a number of cases of claimants for the challenge actually being tested. So he will talk about two of those. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Well, the first scientific testing by the Australian Skeptics, it was, as been mentioned, performed after the triumphant tour of James Randi, was that of mental telepathy, an ability claimed by Rona Devlin. She was a subscriber to the Skeptic. Now, give an idea of the sort of detail one has to go into in this testing. I'll just read out how this went about. Well, our committeeman, Dr. Alan Christophers, drew up an appropriate test procedure, and that had to be acceptable to Rona. Now, the testing was in the form of an initial trial to test whether the telepathic ability was observable. If shown, then the Skeptics would wish to test Rona in a more rigorous manner. By such an approach, this initial testing would be reasonably simple and straightforward. Now, this test took place in one of our committee persons' home, that's Joe Rubenstein, on a Sunday, the 5th of June 1983. In one room were 6 transmitters, each drawing a line diagram of one household object, selected randomly, this was by a roulette wheel, for each test out of the 20 objects from a tray. In the second room was the receiver. This was, of course, Rona. And she was accompanied by an observer. That was to see that it was all was fair play. The rooms were connected with an intercom system. During the test, the only transmission from the first room to the second was by a single set of buzzers, the number of buzzers being the number of the test. Now, the testing was started with a trial run to check that the arrangements were satisfactory. At the end of this trial, Rona wanted it made one of the official tests because she thought she'd had a success. But we didn't agree to this because it's important to stick to the protocol. You just can't select which test is a good one and which one is a bad one after the test is done. Well, Rona said she made the request because she had thought of something round and sharp, and she considered she had a success when told the object selected had been a clock, which has, of course, a round face, and it had sharp hands. But it was pointed out that a number of the other objects, there was a lamp, a telephone, a spoon, a key, a pencil, a doll and a toy boat, each of these had something round and sharp. But in fact, Rona had written pencil. At the end of 5 tests, there was no correspondence between transmitted and received. It's interesting that was a result to be expected 77 times out of 100 when you do your statistics. After this test, Rona requested a non-skeptic present should be the transmitter. The original 6 were all skeptics. This was agreed to, but after one test, Rona said she was not receiving any image. She then asked our committee man, Philip McKerricker, to be the transmitter, but again Rona reported receiving no image. Rona then called it a day, and the results were discussed over a pleasant buffet luncheon. Rona advised there that her ability was variable. Rona was advised that if she could determine when she could expect to exercise her ability, then the Skeptics would be very pleased to carry out a further series of tests. Now, such variability and inability to predict when a psychic ability is present is often advanced as an explanation of a psychic failure. Well, such may be a possibility, but we'd suggest that such an ability which cannot predict would seem to be useless in terms of any practical application. So that was the Rona-Devlin test. We're very pleased to say that Rona went away quite happy with the way we'd conducted the tests. Now, the second test was not actually a test for the $20,000, but it was an ESP experiment carried out as a Science School Week project. And we Skeptics provided advice, including an extract from James Randi's Test Your ESP Potential. This is extrasensory potential, and an appreciation of the results of this test of ESP carried out as a project for Australian Science in Schools Week in October 1984. Now, there were 3 students of the Brighton Technical High School, and with the encouragement of their science teacher, they arranged this ESP experiment, in which some 3,000 students from some 40 schools were to participate. Students from half the schools were to think at 12 noon on Thursday, the 18th of October, of one picture out of 5 that had previously been selected. And this selection was appropriately carried out by a blind student from the Blind Institute. The students of the other half of the schools were to tick whatever the 5 pictures, or none if they received none, that first came to mind on the checklist provided at this same time. Also, scientifically, of course, one had to have a control. We had a control. Classes at other schools were to record similar pictures at a time 1 or 2 days before the test time, that is, receiving without any conscious transmission. Now, the purpose of the test was firstly to possibly identify any indication that some class of students had a significant ability to receive this system telepathically. But secondly, and that's yet more assuredly, the test was to be a valuable learning experience for students participating in some of the procedures needed to carry out scientific testing. But we found that the format of the experiment, whilst good for the learning experience, was not so good in terms of identifying ESP. The choice the students had made of pictures, there was a face, a tree, a ship, a light bulb, a koala, appeared to have been chosen for their appeal rather than being purely an objective basis. It would have been better if they'd used more standard Zener or similar objective symbols. The Zener ones are a circle, lines, triangles, square and star. Also, having only one transmission was the weakest part of the test for ESP. At least 30 transmissions of one picture randomly selected would have been needed to reduce this subjective bias. On the day itself, there were 636 students from 11 schools taking part. Well, the results were that the most reported picture, and that was the selected picture, had a large deviation, and that was the best one that they chose. But also, almost the same success was achieved with another figure, and there was also there was a very strong negative deviation for a koala. So these very small chances that did occur indicated that this subjective bias was very much occurring. Now finally, the third test was carried out, and that was in August 1984. Andrew Fitzherbert of Brisbane applied to be tested for his claimed psychic ability. And Andrew stated, "I can pick up facts about people by psychrometry." What's this, psychometry? Well, by holding a watch, a key ring, etc., I can detect miscellaneous facts about the owner's life and present circumstances. By the way, Andrew was also a recognised media palmist, so we were rather suspicious about him being a professional. Well, on receipt of the completed application form, the Skeptics National Committee formed a subcommittee. Now, interested to see what we had to have there, which included, of course, a magician, who was Mike Wilton, and he actually prepared the draft protocol for the preliminary test. And this protocol was sent to both Andrew and the Queensland Committee. Of course, Andrew being up in Brisbane, we arranged for the Queensland Committee to actually carry out the test. What the standard conditions tries to make plain is that it is a scientific test, not just a hurdle for the claimant to try and jump. At the same time as Mike Wilton emphasised, our magician, that the test needed to be kept as simple as possible. This is a big advantage of having a preliminary test where we set a design basis of the odds of success by chance of being 1 in 100, as against that for the main test of 1 in 1,000. In fact, the most difficult part of this psychometric testing was in determining the statistical basis. We are fortunate in having Monash Professor of Mathematics, Warren Ewens, and lecturer Dr. Waterson to assist us. And Andrew had a statistician, Mr. Bruce Caird, to assist him. I might say originally I thought the protocol should demand a degree of specificity in each statement. In other words, Andrew should make pretty specific statements. But the mathematical analysis indicated the more general the statement, the better the score for chance, whilst a very specific statement might score a lucky hit. So in the end, no restrictions as to generality were applied. I might say the Queensland Committee did an excellent job in carrying out this test on a Sunday morning of the 15th of August 1985. I might say it took about 12 members of the Skeptics up in Queensland to be present by the time you had the actual subjects and also the observers, etc., etc. So carrying out such a test is no small enterprise. Now the results were that there was no significant indication of any ESP ability, and this Andrew readily acknowledged. That was very pleasing to us. Later Andrew advised he was going to carry out further tests of his own, trying to generate more specific statements. He also stated he was unhappy with the personal items given him, such as 4 isolated keys, the disposable cigarette lighter, the disposable plastic pen. But of course, you can check on what's on your own person at the moment. I don't think many of us have really very much in the way of a very personal nature that we now carry around with us. So that gives an idea of the detail we need to get into in this testing, and I think it's of interest, as Ian has mentioned, that out of all the people who have applied for us, in effect there's only been 2, apart from the water diviners that were tested by James Randi. These are the only 2 who've really made it to an actual test. Thank you.